Okay. Alright, welcome everyone to this stream. Okay, there we go. Okay, everyone, welcome to the stream. Alright, so I'm using a different computer this time, so it's going to be a little more, probably a little more buggy. So this is my second live stream. I'm going to be narrating perhaps at least the next chapter of my creepypasta, if not maybe the next 2 chapters. Maybe I'll shoot for a third one again. Alright. Alright, this is Otto's Toy Factory, Chapter 4, Trouble in Paradise. And, so if it sounds like it has a bunch of run-on sentences and everything, it's still a work in progress. So, alright, let's just go ahead and just dive right into it. Okay. Chapter 4, Trouble in Paradise. Otto's Toy Factory. Otto's Toy Factory, Chapter 4, Trouble in Paradise. Alright, let's get into this. Dad showed up about 15 minutes later with 2 cheeseburgers along with 2 generous handfuls of Lay's potato chips resting on 2 eggshell white plates. We ate lunch while watching Looney Tunes, laughing at their over-exaggerated reactions and asking each other which one was our favorite. As soon as it ended and Digimon turned on, Dad took my plate and exited the room. He was never really into anime. I watched the episode and dug out my notebook from my desk and drew a picture of me and Otto playing the night before. Hours passed as I remained in bed, watching TV and drawing until Dad brought dinner. Hey, Dad. Oh, hey, Dad. Yes? Could you put on a movie for me? I asked. Sure, Luke. What would you like? My father asked. I pondered over the question before finally asking, do we have The Nightmare Before Christmas? Sure do. Be right back. Dad grinned, leaving the room. I knew it was getting darker outside. I thought that if I didn't put the note in the window soon, Otto would assume that I didn't want to be friends anymore and go away. Excuse me, I got hiccups. Okay, sorry about that. Got hiccups. Didn't want to be friends anymore and go away. I knew the movie would probably be my only window of opportunity to do so. And Dad came back in with the VHS in hand. Suddenly, he asked, how about we watch this together? My eyebrows creased in concern. I wanted to tell him no, but I knew that it would only rouse his suspicion. I'm sorry. Okay, hopefully the hiccups went away. My eyebrows creased in concern. I wanted to tell him no, but I knew that would only rouse his suspicion. We always watched Nightmare Before Christmas together, before what happened with Mom. Well, I unwillingly replied, sure, Dad. Okay. Dad put the tape into the VCR, taking a seat at the edge of my bed, and wrapped his arm around my shoulder as we watched the trailers. It wasn't until about halfway through the movie when Dad noticed my artwork. What's this? He asked, picking up my notebook. Nothing, Dad, just a drawing. I answered, trying to throw off a scent. Of what? He asked casually. Just a Digimon I made up. Oh, one of those new anime fads, huh? Just as quickly as it came, Dad's interest began to fade. But before returning to the movie, he asked, what's his name? Ottomon? I answered. Dad's curiosity returned. Ottomon? Yeah. Dad turned his attention back to the drawing and examined it further. Isn't this the same name of the creature you've seen the other day? He asked suspiciously this time. Knowing what was coming, I quickly told the truth I knew he would believe. Yeah, Dad. You were right. I just made him up to get attention. I responded with the best composure I could muster. Why? His voice, Dad's voice, taking on a deeper, more agitated tone. I looked up to I looked up to him, seeing the look on his face. He wasn't truly angry with me, but he was very annoyed because of my voice trailed off. Because of what? Dad's voice grew more impatient. I hesitated, pulsing with it. Pulsing with an instinct to protect my friend. I paused and lowered my head shamefully. Then, with a sad and broken voice, I replied, "Because of Mom." I didn't see it, but I felt Dad's demeanor change from anger to sorrow. "Oh, Luke," he whispered painfully. I began to cry. So did he. Forgetting the movie was playing, Dad and I spent the rest of the duration hugging each other, our hearts filled with sorrow. Dad eventually left me to my drawings. I wiped away the last of my tears, and I waited to calm down completely before getting out of bed and placing my message in the window. Sleep came shortly after. Once again, I woke up just after midnight. Instinctively, I went to the window and where a new note waited wedged in the crack. It read, "Hey Luke, meet me at the site. I thought Hey Luke, meet me at the site. I thought we could play some more. Also, I have something you'd like." Like before, excitement took over my common sense as I unlocked the window, gathered my dirt-laden clothes, and rushed for the front door. Still holding my boots and coat under my arm, I reached for the elevator door before throwing them on and making my way downstairs and outside to the site. Otto was waiting for me. "Hey, Otto," I called out as he waved to me in excitement, wagging his giant tail. I leaped into his arms, and he gave me the biggest bear hug I've ever gotten. It was very difficult for me to choke down the smell. I moved away from, though it was still very difficult for me to choke down the smell. I moved away from him and asked, So what did you want to show me?" Otto's ears perked up, raising his index claw for me to wait as he retreated into the shadows of one of the many empty corridors of the structure. When he returned, he was hiding something behind his back. "What you got there, Otto?" I asked playfully. Otto grinned. Otto grinned back and revealed the gift. It was a trumpet case. Otto opened it and pulled out a shiny, almost brand new trumpet, holding it over his head the same way Ash Ketchum holds up a Pokeball. Otto puckered his lips and pressed the instrument against his mouth. He blew into the instrument. A loud note echoed through the site. It wasn't a musical note, but more like a loud fart noise, which echoed through the architecture. I burst into laughter. Otto laughed too, his breath filling the atmosphere. I remember thinking, wow, Otto has a really bad case of halitosis. Not wanting to be rude, I didn't say anything. Otto attempted to play another note, which, like before, came out as a giant fart. I found myself rolling on the ground, laughing even louder and harder than before. On his third attempt, the note came out almost perfect, but not quite. You could still hear some of the flatulence lingering just behind it. Otto stopped and waited for me to calm down, which took a while. Even when I got back up, I still had the strong case of the giggles. Otto gently patted my back, the only way a giant bear creature could, a way that almost knocked the wind out of me. I finally relaxed and looked back up to him. Otto was wearing that closed smile and then played that trumpet again. This time, the music came out perfectly. The notes were kind of random, but the pitch was perfect nonetheless. The music radiated through the construction site until a voice in a passing car, most likely a teenager's, yelled out, "You suck, asshole!" Otto stopped and wheeled around to the source of the voice. At the same time, a 94 Mustang convertible filled with about 5 teenagers raced down the road far past the legal speed limit. As the car passed Otto's ears went flat, and a low growl resonated from his throat. He lowered the trumpet to his side, and his growls grew deeper. The car sped off around the corner. The teens laughing all the way. As they faded, Otto sniffed the air, his growl growing angrier and angrier as he flexed his eye sockets on the road, as he fixated his sockets on the road, taking on a darker, more sinister expression as he continued to sniff the air from the direction the car used to be. That is, until I placed my hand on his paw. Otto, are you okay? I asked in concern. Then, like the flip of a switch, Otto's fuzzy gray ears perked up, and he looked back at me, and the same closed smile returned to his face. He gestured that it was nothing, but did not play the trumpet again. He just placed it gently back into its case and closed it. As he did, I noticed the name tag at the top of the case read, "Property of Barry Wilcox." I also noticed what appeared to be dried red liquid all over it. I assumed that it was the same red paint that I saw before when Otto was in the music room. I raised a brow and was about to ask the obvious question until Otto grabbed the case and tossed it overhead. The case landed perfectly onto a wooden platform, outlining what would soon be the second floor. He gestured for me to forget about the trumpet for a while. I figured his feelings were hurt and he just wanted to feel better. So I decided to agree, no questions asked. We played and climbed the site until about an hour before the sun rose. Then Otto walked me back to the apartment and dropped me off in my room, handing me another note. I waved goodbye as the old bear returned to the wilderness. Afterwards, I quickly disrobed and jumped into bed, opening the note. Do you want to play again? At the bottom were the same boxes for yes and no. Yet at the bottom, the same boxes yes and no waited. I grabbed my pencil and checked yes. I stuffed the note in Bo's pocket and rested comfortably. The following day went perfectly great. I played with my toys, watched the usual 90s weekday cartoons. I even took a nap. Dad didn't check on me much, and because of that, I was able to slip the note in my window earlier than before while Dad went out and bought some chocolate ice cream for dessert. A small reward for being so strong during this difficult time. Later that night, Otto and I met in our usual playground, wrestling around and trampling through the new obstacles provided by our constructor friends. A few times we even went out into the fields and played. I even brought some of my toys to introduce to him, including Bo. The jolly old bear was delighted to meet all of them, Bo especially. As soon as I mentioned that he was my favorite toy, he smiled the largest closed smile I ever saw and raised the rabbit up to the moon. Kind of like the Lion King, only Bo was facing him. He examined and played with him for a while before I recommended playing with my action figures instead. We played with them for hours, and I made up stories as Otto miraculously brought my colorfully painted scenes to life. How we were... give me a second. Still 7 in the morning, guys. All right. How we were never spotted, I'll never know. But at least it was a blast. Otto even seemed to have forgotten about the previous night. He didn't seem sad or upset at all. Though Otto didn't bring the trumpet. He didn't play with it too much. I assumed he must have gotten too caught up with our games to remember. Once the night was over, Otto took me back home, as usual, giving me another note before leaving. Do you want to play again tomorrow? I was eager to check the box for yes when I remembered I had school the following morning. I reluctantly checked no, but I wrote down the reason why. No, because I have school tomorrow. If I stay up late tonight, Dad will find out and he wouldn't want us to play anymore. I put the note into Bo's pocket for later use and went to sleep. I woke around noon to see Dad standing by my doorway again. But this time he had a small piece of paper in hand. I remained fixated on the paper, fearing the worst. "Hey son, how'd you sleep?" he asked. "Okay," I replied, staring at the paper. "Good," Dad nodded. "Luke?" I held my breath. "I'm going to the store for a few minutes to get some groceries." Dad held up the piece of paper. "I may stop by McDonald's on the way back. Would you like anything?" My mind exhaled in relief. After a minute, I yelled merrily, "I'd like a Happy Meal with chicken nuggets." Dad smiled. "All right." He wrote down my request. "See you in a little bit." Dad turned and left. I heard him shuffle for his coat and house keys before leaving the house, locking the door behind him. I jumped out of bed and retrieved the note from Bo and slipped it into the window frame. Then I returned to my bed and turned on the TV. The TV flickered to life with a static before slowly fading into a grainy image of a random news channel. On the screen was a woman with sandy brown hair. In other news, local officials are on the lookout for 5 missing high school students. I looked at the picture on their upper left shoulder. It was a picture of 5 kids, 3 guys and 2 girls, wearing classic high school Letterman jackets. The victims were all adolescent and appeared to be between the ages of 16 and 18 years old, grinning, grinning genially in their high school photos. Underneath each picture was a tall white blocky word, "missing." Underneath each class photo were their names. The screen changed to the 5 class photos of the missing teens as the reporter continued. The teens, Charlie Musket, Samantha Harding, Tommy Collette, Gary Goldwater, and Tanya Gallagher, have been missing since yesterday morning. Apparently, the teens had decided to go on a joyride after a neighborhood party that very night, according to friends. Their disappearance is theorized to have occurred sometime in the early morning hours. It is believed that they originally planned to drive to Chico before getting lost up in Cherokee Road. They were last seen heading up at the Highway 70 in Charlie Musket's 1994 red Mustang convertible. The car was found at 8 a.m. this morning, 15 miles outside of the Placerville County area. Charlie's car was found flipped over in a ditch, almost camouflaged behind the brush. The vehicle was riddled with dents and what appeared to be claw marks ripping through the driver's side door. Alongside it was some torn bits of clothing, including one torn high school Letterman jacket, presumably Charlie's, covered in blood and with a crushed arm underneath one of its sleeves. However, there were also signs of another car present at the scene. It is believed that the second car may have been responsible for damage. However, there was also deep, long gashes with chunks of glass and steel embedded in the muddy field surrounding the area. The only plausible explanation for this would be that the second car may have been thrown off the road and downhill. It has yet to be recovered. But investigators still cannot explain where the almost animal-like tears could have come from. But witnesses who were driving just a few miles behind stepped forward to provide possible explanation for this mystery. Reporting to the department, they heard something. Reporting to the department that they had heard screaming as well as a strange animal noises nearby their homes. One of the witnesses had this to say. The screen changed to an elderly couple living just outside of town, standing beside an isolated road. Their faces were blurred out, keeping their identities anonymous. The old woman calmly described what she had witnessed. Well, my husband and I were driving down the road when we heard the sound of a loud crash. Followed by tires squealing and a huge crash following by a car alarm. That was quickly followed by what sounded like kids screaming. At first, I thought it was happening on the road. It was so loud. I thought for sure we were going to see the event and our headlights at any moment, but we didn't see anything. It being so dark outside, we couldn't see anything in the trees neither. But we did hear something, all right. Kids screaming and what sounded like some kind of big animal roaring. I wanted to hurry down the road and see if we could find them and help, but my husband argued that we needed to find a place to stop and call the police. What kind of animal noises did you hear? The reporter asked, pulling the microphone away swiftly before returning it to the old lady's mouth. Well, it sounded like some kind of bear, the woman replied. The interviewer took the microphone away again. A bear? Yes, yes. What kind of bear? A big bear, huge, a record breaker if somebody was crazy enough to hunt it. With that, the old woman's husband chimed in. Lord knows I wouldn't, and I've been hunting bears up in Alaska for over 40 years, he said. I was shocked. The screen then clicked back to the anchorman shuffling some papers around before looking back to the cameraman. The anchorman continued. Cops are unsure how a bear could have gotten in the area. Some have theorized that it was a grizzly, but judging by the damage, it would have been a bear. It had to have been a grizzly over 10 feet tall, weighing approximately 800 to 1,500 pounds. Raising the most obvious question, how could a bear this large go completely unnoticed by people? Authorities and volunteers scoured the wooded areas within a 5-mile radius and found no signs of the bear. The second car or missing teenagers in the area. It had been theorized that a bear this big may have migrated in town from another state, though scientists claim the odds of a bear this large traveling in town is highly improbable, but not impossible. The screen changed again to her co-anchor who was a much older man. Wow, spooky, isn't it? He said casually. The two anchormen uncomfortably chuckled at the concept. Well, on the lighter side of everything, a special little boy got a special surprise today. I changed the channel. I just couldn't believe it. I wouldn't believe it. Hastily, I tried to think of another explanation for what had happened to those missing teens. Maybe it was a car accident, but that wouldn't explain the animal noises. Maybe it was some other bear, but there are no bears any larger than the black bear in the wilderness. And even then, seeing a bear in this part of the state was rare. Maybe my thoughts trailed away because I couldn't think of anything to explain the situation. Then I thought of Otto. I remembered how angry he got when the driver, Charlie Musket, criticized Otto's trumpet playing. With that, I began to wonder, did Otto do this? Why? No. He can't be capable of this. He's too nice. I continued to argue with myself. I had to ask Otto. I had to ask him. I remembered the note in the window. I got out of bed again and retrieved it. I erased my previous answer and checked yes before putting it back. I had to see him again. I had to ask him if he did what I thought he may have done. I tried to occupy myself with some more cartoons, but the idea never left me. It remained dormant in my mind until Dad walked through the door, juggling groceries and McDonald's in his arms. Dad called me to the kitchen and had me help give him a hand putting them up. Afterward, we ate some lunch and talked about what would happen if Dad got his promotion. Our conversation wasn't really one at all. It was more like planning, on his part anyway. I was so excited about the idea of moving, but was concerned as well. I was worried that I would lose my friend, and that he wouldn't be able to find me if we changed locations. And inevitably, I couldn't help but wonder how Otto would react to the new situation that was about to unfold. If my bear did do something to those teens, what would he do to me or Dad? especially Dad, since it was his idea to move. All right, that was. Give me just a second, guys. All right, here we go. Chapter 5, Accusations. Before going to my room, Dad reminded me that I had school the next day and not to stay up too late. I agreed. I couldn't stay up too late. I had to go to bed early, but not to prepare for school. I went to my room and played with some toys until dinner time, and then inevitably bedtime. Once again, I woke up just after midnight. I got dressed in my usual outfit, snuck out, and went to the construction site. Otto was there waiting. He didn't have the trumpet. In fact, the trumpet was nowhere to be seen. I thought for sure he would have it with him and would be willing to play it again. Otto, where's the trumpet? I asked, trying my hardest to mask my suspicions. Otto raised his shoulders and bent his head to the right in an exaggerated, clueless manner. Otto, the bear leaned in better to listen to what I had to say. I was intimidated, but managed to squeak out the question. Did you hurt those teens from the other night? Did you do something to them? Otto scratched his head with the tip of his claw, confused, like he was still wondering as to what I was talking about. There was a long pause before I think he finally understood the question, then shook his head no, innocently. That simple gesture was more than enough to convince me, and I sighed in relief. Okay, I just wanted to be sure. It's just... Otto raised a brow. Reluctantly, I finished my sentence. Those same teens in that passing car, the ones who were mean to you, they went missing yesterday. The bear's face contorted into a cartoonish surprise while leaning back in shock. He knew I was serious. After another moment, Otto returned to his usual slouched self and scratched his head in confusion. Then, once again, he looked down at me and shrugged his shoulders. He paused. I was still shaken. Reading the concern on my face, Otto reassured me by patting my head oh so gently, like a father who would comfort their son. The soft sole of his paw made me forget about the giant metal claws tipped at the end and reminded me that he was a good monster bear. No evil creature could take on a behavior so gentle. No evil creature could take on a behavior this gentle. If they wanted to hurt anyone, especially me, not if they wanted to hurt anyone, especially me. With that, I dismissed the news report as a random coincidence and eventually forgot the subject as Otto lifted me onto his back and ran. We played Digimon again and climbed the building once more. We ended the night with the same way we did all those other nights, watching the sun progressively rise over the city. By then, I put the whole incident behind me, but I quickly realized that I was supposed to go to school the next day. I gasped. Otto was quick to notice. I forgot that I have to be at school today. I didn't get enough sleep. Typically, Otto didn't seem too worried, continuing to watch the sunlight as I pleaded. Otto! Otto kept watching the scenery. Then, without warning, Otto threw me on his back, and instead of climbing down the building, he launched off the rooftop. I felt my heart hit my mouth as I screamed, holding onto his back as tight as I could. The ground was fast approaching, and I felt my stomach press up to my spine as I closed my eyes and buried my face into Otto's raggedy fur, anticipating that sudden stop. But it never came. Instead, I felt Otto catch something, swing, and land on the vertical concrete. I unlatched my face from the safety of his fur and opened my eyes. I was greeted by Otto as who was looking over his shoulder at me, clinging onto the skeletal structure of the building. We stared at each other for the longest time before Otto turned his head and descended the wall. I looked down and saw we were more than halfway to the ground. I chuckled. Phew! For a second, I thought you were gonna. Otto flung himself off the wall once more. Once again, I found myself hiding in the hump between his shoulder blades. At the last second, Otto whipped his body around and landed on his feet like a cat. Then he proceeded to walk me home as if nothing happened at all. I watched as the sun rose ever higher over the city. Otto, we have to hurry! I shouted. My dad wakes up early on a school day. Otto's ears perked up in alarm, and he reared up on his hind limbs like a horse. He took off full speed to my apartment. He ran fast, even faster than a horse. Before I knew it, the base of the apartment complex was just 10 yards away. At the last second, Otto turned to his side and slid his feet underneath his stomach, stopping just inches before the wall. It took all my strength not to let go of his fur and spatter all over the wall like pancake style. I held on tight as Otto scaled up the building as fast as he could without making too much noise. Otto opened the window and lowered his head. I climbed inside. He handed me another note before climbing back down. I unfolded the piece of paper. I'll see you at school. I smiled before realizing that I had forgotten to tell him that I might be moving away. I wheeled around to deliver the bad news when I saw he was gone. I peeked out the window and watched as the bear trotted into the waiting foliage. I took off my dirty outfit and stuffed it in its rightful place at the back of my closet. Once I was safely tucked away, I wheeled around to go to bed to see if I could get at least a few minutes of sleep, only to see Dad at the doorway, already partially dressed. I hid the note behind my back. Oh, I see you're already up. Greeting the new day? He asked amicably. Yeah, I answered breathlessly. Well, hurry up and get dressed. School's in another 45 minutes. Dad said, glancing at his watch. He exited the room to prepare breakfast. Reluctantly, I got dressed and met my father in the kitchen. During the entire drive to school, my body tirelessly ached for the soothing luxury of my soft bed. The deliberation doubled once the car pulled up to the school entrance. Upon looking at the campus, I noticed the wing containing the music room was closed off with orange and white poles, decorated with yellow police tape. Oh yeah, apparently someone broke into the school a few days back, Dad suddenly recalled as we stared at the crime scene. It was then I remembered Otto being in the music room the day I hurt myself. He must have caused more damage than he realized. I remarked to myself before grabbing my book bag and opening I opened the passenger side and stepped out when Dad noticed my fatigue. You okay, son? I'm fine. Bye, Dad. I exited the car, slumping my pack over my shoulder. I turned to leave when Dad called out, Luke! I looked back. Have a great day at school. Dad gave me a thumbs up for support. I returned the favor as he proceeded to drive away. I watched his car round the corner and out of sight. I stood on the sidewalk for about 30 seconds to prepare myself for the exhausting day ahead. Just before I decided to face the kids on campus, I caught a sign of movement next to the apartment across the street. It was Otto hugging the corner of the building. He looked over to me and waved. I waved back. Luke, what the hell are you doing? I heard a kid's voice call out to me from the playground. Sitting atop the jungle gym was Bear, staring directly at me with a perfectly wicked grin stretching from ear to ear. Dressed in his favorite monster truck t-shirt, as always, along with a pair of jet black designer jeans with white Nike shoes. His red windbreaker jacket shuddered in the morning gust as a pair of big round sunglasses adorning his forehead reflected the sun's immersible rays in my eyes like the crown of a king. His friends stood around him like typical followers they were, with Billy, the sidekick, beside him. Some of the other kids at the playground were watching me too, just to see what the commotion was about. Sing goodbye to my dad, idiot, I replied, trying to make him look stupid. He just drove away before you waved, moron, Barry countered. His buddies laughed their stupid asses off at his counter. I felt the urge to counter again, but out of spite, but my wariness pressed on me. I chose not to give him the satisfaction. I tried to walk to my classroom when he jumped off the gym and bolted in my path. Where do you think you're going, loser? I didn't reply. Instead, I kept my head down and tried to step around him. However, with each step I took, Barry just stepped in front of me with his nose just an inch from mine, his stupid golden grin shining menacingly in my face, like the sun from his specs. I won't lie, I was sorely tempted to knock his perfect teeth to the back of his throat, just to prove a point. But exhaustion was wearing on me, and Dad always taught me to never be the catalyst for a fight. Again, I tried to step around Barry, but he pushed me back. Barry laughed, and as his friends joined in, forming a circle around me, teasing and taunting. Some even started to push me to get the reaction that I refused to give. Forming a larger circle all around us were a few not so innocent bystanders, anxiously waiting for some entertainment before. Barry shoved me again, this time knocking me to the ground. His buddies giggled like retarded hyenas. Leave me alone, I yelled, finally standing my ground. Barry scoffed. Or you'll do what? Call your mommy? Oh, wait, you can't. She's dead, isn't she? With that comment, I knew the perfect countermeasure to scare him. So what if no adult could believe me? But a child my age could. I jumped to my feet. Or I'll tell my friend, I countered. Barry looked to his buddies as they oohed mockingly. You have a friend. You have a friend? Barry pushed me back with a single finger as his gang of retards laughed. Who'd want to be friends with you? Hanging your head out the window, waving at nothing? You're crazy. No wonder your mom killed herself. I do have a friend. His name is Otto the Bear, and he'll kick your ass, I shouted boldly. Barry's face morphed from a sly, carefree demeanor to that of a competitive, almost diabolical disposition. Oh, really? Well, where is he now? Barry announced audaciously, gesturing to the surrounding campus. Otto was nowhere to be seen. My self-confidence sunk lower than a rock dropped in the world's deepest lake. I stammered. Barry impersonated poorly with a goofy face and exaggerated, jerky motions. You know what I think? I think you made him up. He pushed me once more. No, I didn't, I yelled. You made him up. Ha! Looks like crazy is contagious. He shoved me again. I tried to stand my ground, stalling in hopes that Otto would come in and end it. But nothing happened as Barry and his posse closed in. Well, if your friend is real, where is he? Well, I stammered. Where is he, huh? Barry smacked me in the mouth. I fell to the ground, my teeth hurting. Help! Otto, help! I bawled and shouted for Otto, but he never came. Aw, look at the little baby, calling out for his imaginary friend. You gonna call your dead mommy next? He taunted. He's not imaginary, I yelled, tears beginning to form in my eyes. Barry and his buddies proceeded to taunt me, clapping their hands together and chanting, imaginary friend, imaginary friend, imaginary friend. It started with Barry and his buddies, but spread like a virus. Soon the bystanders joined in the chant, imaginary friend, imaginary friend. Their chants grew louder and louder until a malicious melody of mockery. I covered my ears, but the voices still penetrated into my mind, into the very core of my subconscious. Imaginary friend, imaginary friend, imaginary friend. I finally screamed, "No, stop it!" With all my might, I shot off the concrete and violently knocked Barry to the ground. His sunglasses flew off his head like a rocket to the moon, cracking on the blacktop upon landing. The kids exploded into laughter once again. Not at me this time, but at Barry. I felt the sensation of utter satisfaction bloom in my very core as Barry laid there on his ass, unwillingly watching the kids, unwillingly watching as the kids pointed and cackled. Even his lackeys snickered until he shot them a dirty look. Then they shut up on cue. Just then, a campus guard stepped into the scene and blew her whistle, silencing the laughter. "What is going on here?" she boomed. For a minute there was silence. I fumbled to explain myself. He was making fun of me, I sobbed, pointing directly at Barry's face. The authority figure looked at the bully, then turned back to me. "Both of you come with me," she ordered. Barry picked himself up and shuffled behind the guard. I followed. Before we knew it, the both of us were waiting outside the principal's office, sitting on opposite sides of a wooden bench used for the all naughty children who have been caught. We didn't say a word to each other, but until our principal called us in. We took our seats in front of his desk. The principal adjusted his glasses before interlacing his fingers with his left hand, with his hands and into his hands and resting them on the desk. He stared at both of us with businesslike countenance, then spoke with a stern cadence. "Now you both know we have a zero tolerance policy for fighting." I didn't start anything," Barry said. "He did." He pointed to me. I jerked my gaze towards the little maggot, completely appalled at what I was hearing. "My friends and I were just hanging out when this loser came to us." The principal raised his hand. Barry shut up right away. The principal paused. "Lucas," he began, "is this true? Did you start the fight?" "No, sir, I didn't." I started to explain myself, but I started to explain only to have Barry cut me off. Yeah, he did. He did." Barry waved his arms around, vouching for his innocence. I grew angry. If there was one thing the spoiled brat loved more than bullying, it was lying. "Barry, that's enough," the principal snapped. Like before, Barry shut his mouth instantly for the time being. The principal looked to me again. "Lucas, what were you about to say?" "What I was trying to say," I began, "is that I was about to go to class and ask for my makeup homework when Barry started bugging me." "No, you weren't," Barry interrupted again. "You were waving at your imaginary friend." "What imaginary friend?" Principal asked suspiciously. "Some invisible guy named Otto," Barry exclaimed with certainty. "He's not imaginary!" I yelled in his ear. Barry tried to slap me in return. I tried to hit him back. We almost got into a full-blown brawl when the principal sprung to his feet. "Enough!" he boomed thunderously. The two of us stopped fighting and instantly sat back down. "Now, who is Otto?" the principal glared at me. "Otto is my friend," I explained. "He and I play together and we—" "Imaginary!" Barry interrupted again. "No, he's not!" I yelled in the office in frustration. "Barry, wait outside," the principal ordered. With a grunt, Barry shot up from the chair and stomped outside, his arms crossed defiantly. "Now, who is Otto?" I finally, the principal asked. I finally managed to explain my part of the story. I told the principal about Otto and how he and I played together. Once I finished, the principal asked, "Does he go to the school?" "No," I squeaked. "Is he imaginary?" "No!" "Luke, calm down. I'm just asking a question. Is Otto imaginary?" "No!" Why does everybody keep saying that? Otto is a giant teddy bear who hangs out with me after school. We exchange notes to each other and play. I talk to him about everything. I insisted, abandoning the promise I kept to myself. Does he talk back? The principal asked. No, his mouth is stitched shut. The principal stopped. I explained. The principal stopped talking and raised a brow. Luke, he began, I want you to go back to class. I'm going to call your father and tell him about what happened. My lower lip quivered as my eyes welled up with tears. You're not in any trouble, he reassured. Barry causes trouble for many of the students here. Just forget about this morning for now and go to your class. What about Barry? I asked, in fear of any potential retaliation. Barry's staying here. I'll give him a good talking to, and if he tries to bother you again, come straight to me. I felt my tears melt away like butter on toast when he said that. Knowing that Barry was finally gonna get his after 3 years of having to stomach his shit. He always got away with it until today. I wasn't afraid to merrily skip out of the office, passing by my tormentor on my way to class, my head held high. I took my seat in the classroom with a huge smile on my face. I took out my notebook and I proceeded to copy down whatever was on the whiteboard. I sat politely and answered the questions Mrs. Anderson asked the class, getting them right each and every time. When recess rolled around, however, the bliss of the day took a sudden nosedive back into reality. Out of nowhere, Barry popped out before me and punched me in the face. One moment I was running to the slide, the next I was on the ground, blood gushing from my nose. Barry towered over me like a blackened tombstone. His right hand balled into a bloody fist. Hey, loser, you got me in trouble, and you stole my trumpet. He indicted at the top of his lungs. At first, I was confused by his sudden accusation but then the memory of Otto rummaging through the classroom that day flashed through my mind like a bolt of lightning. I figured out the situation on my own, which would also be confirmed by my father later that day. It turned out an hour after I went home, the faculty discovered the music room in shambles, along with what was left of the school janitor, haphazardly stuffed inside the school piano. Barry must have forgotten his trumpet in the classroom and didn't realize it until just today. After leaving the principal's office, when he heard of what happened, he instantly thought it was me or was just looking for another excuse to fight me. I swiftly denied his accusation. Well, if you didn't steal it, then who did? I found myself still yet again, and under my breath, I uttered the softest whisper possible. Otto. I knew Otto was responsible and may have killed the janitor simply because he startled him. Oh yeah, right. Your imaginary friend took it. You're a liar and a thief. Barry pointed an accusing finger at my face. I chuckled. Takes one to know one, huh, Barry? I said with a smile. Barry just stood there in rage, his face redder than a maraschino cherry. He finally screamed, I'm going to tell on you. He turned to walk away when he realized the campus security guard was standing right behind him. The same one from earlier that morning. He was shocked, and so was I. I was so busy watching Barry, the brat, throw his temper tantrum that I didn't even notice her approaching. Seizing the opportunity, Barry pointed at me and said, he stole my trumpet. I don't care, the monitor replied sternly. You punched him, I saw it. But he stole my trumpet, Barry whined, faking childlike innocence. However, this campus security guard saw right through his veil of lies and grabbed him by the arm. Barry started to cry immediately. She gestured for me to get up and follow. She marched us to the principal's office. I had to write down my side of the story while Barry was dropped off at the principal's. Afterwards, I had to go to the nurse's office. Luckily, my nose wasn't really broken, just a vein was. The bleeding was only temporary. After about 20 minutes, I was called to join Barry in the office. When I arrived, my dad was talking with the principal, and Barry's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox, were also there along with Barry, who was whimpering like a baby, clutching his mother's arm. Though they were divorced, they had no problem banding together to stave off the threat to their boy. Both his parents were dressed in their Sunday best, while glaring at me as if I was Satan himself. "He stole my trumpet! He stole it!" Barry wailed. "We're about to find out if that's true or not," the principal said before looking to me. "Luke, sit down." I slowly made my way to the front desk and took my seat next to my father. "Luke, did you take Barry's trumpet?" the principal asked. "No, sir," I answered. "He's lying!" Barry screamed. With that, Mrs. Wilcox intervened. "Look, if my son said he stole something, then it must be true. My son never lies." My stomach turned into a knot. I wanted to shout what an idiot she was, but I knew it would be pointless as long as I could remember, Barry's parents only saw their son as the perfect little angel, one who never lies, cheats, or steals. That he always was, and he always was, and would always be, and always would be, the perfect child in their eyes. What a saint! What an angel! If they only knew. Dad knew. He and Mom had plenty of encounters with these ignorant dipshits. "No, sir," I repeated. "I didn't steal anything." Mr. Wilcox scoffed. "Lying little prick." "What?" Dad growled, his fist balled up as if to punch Mr. Wilcox. "Your brat has been lying about my son since," Mr. Wilcox started. "Oh, don't even," Dad barked. "You pretend that your brat is a perfect little angel. That's enough." The principal tried to intervene, but his voice was drowned out by the argument. Our son would never hurt us," Mrs. Wilcox hissed. Dad laughed, turning his attention to Barry. "You may have your parents fooled, but not me, you little bastard," he snapped at him. All right, that's enough," the principal began, but once again he was easily overpowered by the clashing parents. "How dare you talk to my son like that?" Mr. Wilcox stepped forward with his fists. "We are a Christian family, and my son knows better than to. Don't come at me with that shit." My father exploded. Mr. Wilcox's face filled with rage. The principal attempted once more to intervene. "Your family is touched by the devil. Why else would your wife take her own life? That's a sign. She had no soul, and neither do you," Mrs. Wilcox sneered. Dad stepped up, towering over them. Months of stress swelled into a head. "Say that again, you fucking bitch," he glared. Are you threatening my ex-wife?" Overwhelmed by months of stress and emotion, my father nearly tackled Mr. Wilcox to the wall. "No, we're not doing that here, and especially not in front of the children," the principal stated. My father's eyes remained locked onto his target in a never-ending staring contest. Barry's mom was also joining in the standoff. I, on the other hand, was staring at Barry, who was lashed onto his mommy's side, staring back at me with menacing eyes masked by tears. That same stupid maniacal grin across his face. He was enjoying the show. "Now," the principal continued, "we're going to sit down and discuss the situation like adults." The three parents sat back down. Silence briefly followed. "Luke, I will ask one more time," the principal continued professionally. "Did you steal Barry's trumpet?" "No, sir," I answered truthfully. "Seriously? You're going to believe this heathen?" Mrs. Wilcox shouted once more. My dad nearly flew out of his seat. There would have been a real fight had the principal not thrown up his hand. "Stop!" the principal demanded, ignoring him. Dad continued to present his statement. I have personally checked my son's room and found no trace of your son's trumpet. I found nothing. If my son stole your kid's instrument, I would have found it. Therefore, Luke is telling the truth. Dad pointed to Barry. If there's one who's lying, it is your son. Besides, it was probably that psycho who took it, the same one who broke into the school. My son is not a liar, Mrs. Wilcox. My son is not a liar, Mrs. Wilcox said, clutching her beloved child to her chest. Barry, of course, faking an innocent demeanor. But he couldn't fool my father. Dad could clearly see the horns holding up that halo. And he certainly doesn't make up characters. Your kid's psychotic. He is touched by the devil. She yelled. Dad looked at me, perplexed. Then back to her. You mean my son's Digimon? He barked, looking at her like she was stupid. Mrs. Wilcox laughed again. Another satanic trend by satanic people. At least we have enough decency to never allow our child to watch such heresy, she scoffed. If only she knew how defiant her ex and son really was. She didn't know it, but Mr. Wilcox had been secretly buying Pokemon cards for Barry just to defy her. She never knew because Barry kept them in his backpack. I remembered hearing Barry boasting about that fact when he took them out one day during recess for his first Pokemon battle. For his trading sessions, Barry would have his lackeys terrify the smaller kids and steal their cards. If Barry wasn't doing that, he was beating an opponent in a Pokemon battle, cheating and hypocritically accusing the other opponent of doing so. He wasn't afraid to get in your face about winning either, flashing his most prized possession, in a foiled Charizard that Barry always raved about being his symbol. And at least our son knows the difference between fantasy and reality, what Mr. Wilcox started. He threatened my son with his make-believe monster, saying it's gonna beat him up. He directed his tone to me. Dad looked over to me. I only said that to scare him away, I explained. Barry kept shoving me. Did you shove him? Dad asked. Yeah, but he shoved me first. I pointed to Barry, who gave me a nasty glare. Well then, good job, son. Dad patted my back. You're rewarding him for attacking my son? Mr. Wilcox yelled. He was defending himself, Dad argued. Bullshit, Mr. Wilcox yelled. Right, that's it, the principal snapped. I believe I have heard the full story, and I believe Barry left his trumpet after band class. It was clearly stolen, probably by the same band who attacked our janitor. Luke, go ahead and go back to class. Barry, you are suspended for starting 2 fights today. The Wilcox family gasped. Despite their losing case, Barry's father continued. How dare you? My son is not. Leave my campus now. The principal pointed to the door. Don't worry, we'll be leaving. Mrs. Wilcox and her son got up from their chairs and headed towards the door. Before exiting, Mrs. Wilcox returned. In fact, my son will no longer be attending this school. Barry and his parents left angrily, slamming the door behind them. Good riddance, then, Dad excelled silently. He and the principal then exchanged a few more words before shaking hands, and we both exited his office. Once we were outside, Dad tapped my shoulder. Luke, you're not in trouble. He reassured me. Good job for standing up for yourself. I will see you at the end of the day. Dad patted my shoulder and set me on my way. All right. Last one for the day. Chapter 6. Strange Happenings. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. All right. Just want to make sure I still have my audience engaged. All right. Make sure my computer isn't too. Okay. Chapter 6. Strange Happenings. It was well into class time by the time I got back. Like before, I took my seat and quietly took notes.
I didn't answer any of Mrs. Anderson's questions this time, nor did I really participate much in group work. I just sat there studying quietly with one eye on the clock, waiting for the final bell to ring for lunch. When the bell finally did when lunch finally did roll around, I was one of the first kids outside. I was so absent-minded that I almost forgot to take my place in line. We walked the crowded and stuffy cafeteria. Kids in the lunch line pushed and prodded at each other as the line slowly shrank. One by one, students in line paid their usual $1.50 before picking up their trays and meeting their friends at their chosen table. I proceeded further and picked up my tray, cheap chicken nuggets and tater tots. I sat down at a random table and ate my lunch as the other kids socialized. When I finished, I went straight to the table. Oh, no, I went straight to the playground. Like before, I simply hung out. I simply hung out before attempting to play with some of the other kids. I approached one small group of kids who participated in a game. "Hey, can I play?" I asked. Without saying anything, the other kids shunned me and started playing amongst themselves, leaving me in the dust. So instead, I decided to go and play with the kids at the red corkscrew slide. I was met with similar silence, coupled by blank stares and with complete confusion, with a hint of disgust, like they were asking themselves, "Why is he here?" When I left, I heard the kids giggle amongst themselves. Before I was out of earshot, I heard one of them said, "Did you notice how bad he smells?" I don't recall ever seeing those kids after that encounter. I spent the rest of recess sitting on a bench watching the other kids. My vision then lingered to the row of houses behind the black barred fence, searching for Otto. He was nowhere to be found. I remember being mad at him for not stopping the fight, for not helping me. A part of me was glad he didn't show up. In fact, the same part of me hoped that I would never see him again. The rest of the day was the same too. Nobody bothered to pay attention to me, not even Mrs. Anderson. Though I suspect it was because she was too busy channeling all of her energy and disciplining the more hyperactive students. I tried to focus all of my energy on writing in my notebook. By the end of the day, I found myself doodling Otto on the corners of the pages. Don't get me wrong, I was mad at Otto at first, but after some reflecting, I realized he probably didn't show up so that no one could prevent us from playing together. No one could prevent us from playing all together. When the bell rang for class to end, I was relieved and I was the last student to leave. My father was waiting for me in the car, and we drove home in silence as everything he said was said at the principal's office. My father was waiting for me in the car, and we both drove home in silence as everything he said at the principal's office still lingered from hours earlier. We then we arrived. When we arrived home, I went straight to my room and to do my homework, including all my makeup work for the last 3 days I missed. As suspected, my dad took the toys from my room and locked them back in his closet, including Bo. The TV was gone. Dad wasn't doing it to punish me for what happened earlier in the day, of course. He was just holding up his original standards. Dad was always a man of his word. When he said something, he followed through. I proceeded to study without interruption after 4 long hours. I finally finished my missed assignments and started on my new ones when Dad called me for dinner. I entered the kitchen and sat down to eat my meal: pan-fried chicken, boxed herb rice, and canned peas. About halfway through dinner time, Dad casually asked, "So why did you bring up Ottomon with the bully?" "I was just trying to scare Barry off." "It didn't work," I answered. "I know it didn't work because Ottomon isn't real," Dad stated, stabbing at scraps of cut chicken. He picked a big mouthful of food up on his fork and shoveled it into his mouth. Chewing loudly, Dad choked out another sentence. "I had a talk with the principal before you came, and before you and Barry's parents came in. He told me how worried he was about you. He said that you described your Digimon to him, and the most disturbing part of his mouth was that his mouth was stitched shut. What's that about? Dad asked. Some Digimon have unusual features, I explained. Some of them appear to be made of bones, like Skull Greymon, or like dinosaurs, like Agumon, or like giant plants, like Togemon, or... okay, I get it now. Dad raised his hand to me. Just don't bring Automon up with any other students, okay? I lowered my head. Okay, Dad. Sorry. It's not your fault. Kids go through phases. Mine was the Ninja Turtles. But I grew out of it, and so will you. Don't let your mind get too caught up in fantasy. That won't get you anywhere in life. Life is work, not play. You'll understand that when you're my age, Dad cautioned. I pondered over what he told me. Sure, Dad. Thanks. I cleaned my plate and went back to my room to finish my homework. After having caught up with all of my studies, I went to bed. Before I did, Dad called out to me once more. Oh, and Luke? I turned back. I found your muddy clothes in the closet. What did I tell you about playing in the mud at school? You're too old for that. Oh, sorry, Dad, I replied. I was just pretend playing with Automon. Dad quietly nodded. Fine. Please don't do it anymore. It's unhygienic. You don't know there could be glass or nails lodged in the dirt. I nodded back and went to my room. The next day, I woke fully rested and at my usual morning time. As happy as I was to have finally gotten a decent night's sleep, it was quickly replaced by regret. I didn't check to see if Otto had left me another note. I imagined Otto waiting for me at the construction site in the middle of the night, only to be met with disappointment. He probably thought I didn't want to be friends with him anymore. With that thought in mind, I went to the window and checked the crack, surprisingly left untouched. I guess he forgot. With his busy schedule and all, I thought. There weren't any notes to be found. I thought he just didn't want to be friends anymore, and I almost wanted to cry. I didn't mean those thoughts I had of the other day. Did he somehow sense them? I asked myself. I was about to start sobbing when Dad came in as usual. He greeted me and told me to get ready. I met him in the kitchen, and then he drove me to school. When I arrived at class, of course, I saw Barry's desk was empty. It looked like his parents actually followed through with their threat. I couldn't help but smile at the sight. My smile grew wider as I noticed that Billy was also absent. I sighed in relief because I didn't have to deal with Barry's vengeful sidekick. I still remember the few times I stood up to Barry, only to have Billy waiting for me somewhere on the campus. Like the year before, Barry ripped the wing off my pelican beanie baby I brought for show and tell. And I responded by smashing his favorite transformer on his desk. A few days later, Barry jumped me in the hallway. I had to stay home for the rest of the day after that encounter. Relieved to have finally caught a break, I went through the day without an incident or any trace of my enemies, or of Otto. The weekend came and went. The weekend came and went with nothing but my homework and extracurricular activities keeping me busy. I did notice Otto pop up behind a building or a shrub here and there, but we never met face to face or exchanged any notes. After a few days, I began to wonder why. I wondered if he questioned our friendship. The following week also went without contact. The first 4 days, I noticed that 3 of Barry's other buddies had disappeared too. One, called Michael, was there the following Monday, but vanished Tuesday around lunchtime. The teachers assumed that he skipped class until they called his parents. The second kid, Nick, I think, vanished on his way home the following Wednesday, and vanished on the following Wednesday afternoon. While the third, I assume his name was Hunter or something beginning with an H, was gone Thursday morning during a bathroom trip, creating a grand total of 5 kids missing. They weren't they weren't they weren't in the same classes as Barry, Billy, and me, but I knew they were gone because they weren't harassing me or any other kids during recess. I didn't care though. In fact, the situation only made me feel even better because I assumed that Barry's parents told their parents about how school was too unfair and let their kids keep attending. That is until the following Monday. Dad pulled up alongside the fence as usual when we noticed something odd about the atmosphere of the campus. All the kids were there, and so were their parents, all gathered in a crowd at the entrance, murmuring to each other. Some of the younger parents were looking around and clutching their kids very close. They all seemed so tense, like a pack of dogs when they sense a predator in the area. Puzzled, Dad exited the car with me and clutched my hand too. The crowd paid little attention to our presence as Dad maneuvered his way to the front. Facing the gathering was the school staff and some policemen, with the principal standing at the front. He seemed to be trying to explain the situation and calm the crowd, but when concerned parents asked questions, he'd stammer. That was when a cop stepped in for him. That is until a cop stepped in for him. I didn't need anyone to explain what was going on. I already knew what they were talking about. They were talking about Barry and the other kids going missing. Dad, of course, didn't know or understand what was happening, even with the explanation. So he tapped the shoulder of a person closest to him. "Hey, what's going on?" Dad asked the stranger. "We're here because some kids attending this school have gone missing," the man replied. "Missing?" "Yeah, it's been all over the news this morning. Some kids went missing after the incident with the Wilcox family. Someone broke into their house a few nights ago. Apparently, those other kids who went missing were friends with their son. Cops are thinking there is a killer on the loose." Dad and I looked at each other. "Other kids?" Dad swallowed. "What do you mean?" "Haven't you heard? It was all over the news. Someone broke into the Wilcox household. They found Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox, but their son wasn't in the house with them. He hasn't been seen since. Cops are saying that it was a burglary gone wrong by some druggie. I saw the last of the color drain from my dad's face as his spark of concern ignited into a wildfire of fear. He looked at me again with wide eyes before turning back to the man. Dad shuddered when he asked his next question. "What happened?" Well, it was too graphic to be shown on the news, but the man's voice trailed off when he finally noticed me. "It's best that we don't talk of this in front of the kids." The man quickly turned his attention back to the staff, leaving Dad to worry. My dad then clutched me closer to himself, joining the crowd. There was no school that day. Instead, Dad marched us straight to the car and drove home. He sent me to my room and flipped on the news. That's when he found out about what the stranger was talking about, and I found out from him, as well as the news reports and staff rumors in the passing weeks. Barry's parents were both brutally mutilated in Mrs. Wilcox's home in the outskirts of town. Mr. Wilcox was found outside Barry's bedroom, dismembered and partially gutted with some sharp objects, judging by how many materials were missing from their kitchen. His limbs were violently ripped out of their sockets. Every bone in his body was shattered, and judging by the shattered picture of the frames and busted walls, he was slammed up and down the hallway. Mr. Wilcox had a rifle, also found in the hallway, and bent in half and had been fired only once, with the bullet found embedded in the ceiling. Cops found 3 of his limbs, but the coroners didn't bother looking for the last one because they knew they wouldn't recover it. The biggest clue they received for their theory was Mr. Wilcox's limbs and intestines. They appeared to be half chewed, and detectives considered it was most likely rats and coyotes that were responsible. However, the only signs of that were the unusual different sized muddy and bloody paw prints scattered about the house, ranging from the kitchen to the bedrooms. They weren't able to determine exactly what types of mammals were in the house, but it was clear that there were at least a dozen, and even more at least a dozen. Even more unusual were the hair samples recovered in the scene. They were all synthetic. It was theorized the sick fuckers shredded a couple of Barry's toys as they stormed through the house. There were a few of his toys, even his backpack missing with his secret Pokemon cards. There were a few of his toys, and even his backpack hiding his secret Pokemon cards were missing. There was a long blood trail beginning from Barry's room to the master bedroom where Mr. Wilcox's head lay. Detectives assumed the head was brandished at Mrs. Wilcox as a sick display of victory. Mrs. Wilcox was found near her bedroom window, which was shattered. Detectives deduced that she may have initially tried to exit that way when the assailant seized her by slamming her face into the glass. However, her death seemed to be much more quick and painless compared to her ex. Like her ex-husband, Mrs. Wilcox was cut open. However, she was not decapitated. Some parts were chewed on, but not to the extent of her former partner. The chewing was probably done just to incapacitate Mrs. Wilcox so she couldn't leave. Her body would carry more clues of being beaten to death, primarily in the head and spine, with the biggest clues being the monster-sized divots on the drywall and hardwood floor. It was assumed that whoever or whatever had done this to these people was incredibly big and strong and carried a lot of anger with them, like it was personal. Barry wasn't anywhere in the house, though the police suspected that he was there due to the fact that the intruder came in through his bedroom, which was unusual. What was unusual was that at the end of the room where his bedroom window was located was completely shattered. The wall surrounding was broken to pieces, like something very big slammed through the structure with incredible force and speed. Detectives assumed that it may have been a car. It was also assumed that the intruder may have injured Barry in the process because they found small amounts of coagulated blood on his bed. Out of this whole nightmare, the only thing that could not truly be explained were the giant scratch marks in the hallway walls and scuffs in the paint, seemingly caused by a very big animal. The coroners guessed that by the decomposition of the carcasses, the parents' murder, as well as Barry's kidnapping, took place a night or two after Barry got expelled. It was assumed that the parents were probably arguing over what Barry's future school would be when the attack occurred. But as quickly as they were discovered, they were also forgotten. Instead, cops went with the theory of some meth heads riding a sick high, or perhaps a psycho pedophilic serial killer who was probably stalking Barry weeks before acting out their plan. I also learned Barry's friends have also been taken by possibly the same perpetrator. Their parents were fine physically, but they refused to discuss details with their cases with the press. As soon as I learned of the gruesome details, I suspected who the culprit could have been. My bear, Otto. And how I was beginning to question our friendship. Many kids were ripped out of school, and some were even transferred by their parents, or the families moved out of town altogether. Not that it really mattered either way. School was canceled for the rest of that week. and even the week after that. Teachers gave us our homework to do while we were away. Meanwhile, authorities would patrol the campus and surrounding neighborhood. There was a citywide curfew for everyone, just in case. No one was allowed to go outside after dark until that psycho was caught. Those who were under 18 caught outside after hours would be escorted home via police car. Those over 18 simply got arrested and put in jail for the night, assuming they might be the culprit. When school finally went back in session, just a month before summer vacation, law enforcement still proceeded to patrol the campus, supervising recess and walking down the hallway, walking down every hallway during class time. Any kid who needed to leave the class to go to the bathroom or go to the office had to be escorted by an officer. Any and all staff associated with the missing kids or considered suspicious were pulled aside for basic questioning in a makeshift interrogation room on campus. They were planning on using this routine to catch the freak in the act. Of course, they were unsuccessful. Eventually, they gave up and instead had cars monitor the campus in the morning, at recess, and at the end of the day. But curfew remained until they could catch the perpetrators. A few days later, when Dad got home and I entered my room, I found another note waiting for me in the window. "I'll be waiting for you." I turned my sights back to the building, where there was once excitement and joy, now was replaced with fear and uncertainty. I knew I had to be there, but I didn't know what would happen to me and Dad if Otto was the perpetrator behind these disappearances. Especially if he finds out Dad plans on us moving. I awoke just after midnight, but remained in bed, hoping Otto would just forget and go home. I managed to fall asleep around 3 a.m., but when I awoke again to a pebble bouncing off my window pane. I knew it was Otto. I did not answer at first, but Otto's persistence and my fear got the better of me, and I opened the window to find him gawking at the base of the apartment. "Why didn't you show up? I've been waiting forever." I could see him think. He waved to me. I didn't wave back. He kinked his head to the left inquisitively, as if asking, "What's wrong?" I didn't answer his question. Otto dismissed it, and he put out his massive paws. For a second, I could see those same Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox against the walls and floor of their own home like rag dolls, gripping Barry's face and hauling him as his friends go, hauling him and his friends off to God knows where, and to do God knows what. My body seized, and as raw instinct dug its claws into me, whispering in my ear, telling me, "Don't do it." All right, I will end it right there. That's the end of chapter 6. All right, so I will go ahead and cap it at that, and I'll read the next 3 chapters. Let's see, maybe I'll read the next 3 chapters on Monday morning. All right. Okay, and I hadn't done this for the first 2 videos, but I will next time put in a link to this creepypasta, so that way you can read along with me. And okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cap it right here, and I'll start off with part 7 on. I'll schedule for part 7 on Monday, or no, I'm chapter 7. Okay, that was Otto's Toy Factory, chapters 4 through 6. And have a good day. Thanks.